Welcome to Adventures in Life. I'm your host, Earl Beecher. Our guest is Dr. Richard Schneider, and he is the Chancellor of the University of Global Education. And talking about global, Dr. Schneider has been just sharing with me a little bit some of the travel he's been doing. Dr. Schneider, let's start off. Tell us about the University of Global Education and some of the exciting traveling things that are involved.
Well, there's lots of travel in the University of Global Education, which also has a number of other components, which we'll talk about later, such as a radio. The University of Global Education is what you might call a global, cutting-edge, open university without walls. And therefore, we're literally all over the world. We publish books, a lot of them in the area of ecology. We have University of the Air. Right now, mainly in English and Spanish.
But you're doing it in both languages?
Yes.
Okay.
And our school in India, we actually teach in 3 languages: Telugu, Hindi, and English, all 3 at the same time.
You know, I had a friend from India, and I once asked him, if I ever went over there, what language would I have to speak? He looked at me in complete disgust and said, English. And I said, oh.
It would be helpful if you knew one or 2 others, however.
It is helpful.
Yes. Well, the local language in Andhra Pradesh, where we are, is Telugu. And so the children speak Telugu, or a tribal language. And of course, remember, India has more than 400 languages, 16 main languages.
Well, that's why I was asking him what languages I'd have to know. But English is pretty universal over there.
Universal, but there are lots of places you're not going to hear English. I mean, I still have to have a translator in tribal villages.
Oh. Where's your school located?
Portland, Oregon.
In India, where's your school located?
Mucherla.
I don't know where that is.
Mucherla is about 130 kilometers from Hyderabad, which is south-central India. It's in Andhra Pradesh state.
If I looked at the map of India and it comes down to the point, you're kind of in the middle?
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. Okay, and you are teaching what?
Well, we call it the Mucherla Global School. It's for children 4 to 11 years of age. And we teach what is called the World Core Curriculum. Dr. Robert Mueller developed the philosophy for the World Core Curriculum in his school at the Robert Mueller School in Arlington, Texas.
Yes.
And Dr. Mueller and I have worked together now for a number of years. And when we decided to create this school, we decided to create a global school so these little kids, who literally have never been further from home than 10 miles, would become world citizens. Now, you know, it may sound like a crazy idea, but you
math,
we teach them all the usual things.
All the usual things.
In the context of the world, in the context of world citizenship, in the context of not only are they members
Geography? I'm trying to relate. What?
Well, we teach all the normal subjects, but through a curriculum that focuses on a universal approach to learning. In other words, what we try to do is rewrite all the curriculum to make it culturally relevant to the kids, but with a global view. In other words, when they look up and see an airplane overhead, they realize they're part of a world, even though they're in Mucherla, where they've never been further than a few miles.
It's very agrarian, I presume.
Very agrarian. Mucherla is a town of about, I guess they call it a village, of 10,000 people.
A village, okay.
I have to say, though, by our standards, by Western standards, it's a pretty primitive village in that, for example, there's not a single bathroom in the village.
How did you happen to go from Portland, Oregon, into if you'll excuse the expression, a remote village in India to establish a school? How come you didn't do it in Calcutta or Bombay or, you know, one of the big centers?
Well, that's a very worthwhile question, because the idea was to take the curriculum and find an area where we did not have a lot of other factors to contend with, television and all the kinds of other influences that you might have, and to expose the children to this curriculum based upon the World Core Curriculum and see how well it would work when you could isolate all the factors. You see, in this school...
Is this like a pilot project?
Yes, it's a demonstration.
Throughout the third world?
Demonstration and pilot project. If it works, it's going to be applicable anywhere. All you have to do is rewrite the curriculum, make it culture-free to whatever area you're in. That's the first time it has been done in a rural third world country. There are Robert Mueller schools, for example, using the World Core Curriculum. There are 9 of them, but they're all in the West. The idea was to try to see how this would work, where you could isolate all the factors. And also, of course, you can tell much quicker whether it is working and what does work.
Now, you specifically mentioned the distracting things like television. Does this village have electricity? Do they have video there? Could you use video as a medium and replicate the courses? Or
we intend to do that. First of all, there isn't television there yet.
okay.
No. Secondly, we are going to, in our second year, which begins in the not distant future, we will actually use video for the first time. We're going to introduce video in school.
That is going to shock those people to be able to see this kind of thing.
And there's so many wonderful things on video today. I mean, as an educational tool. The other way, it's a wonderful way to teach language, because you don't need to have all sorts of extra teachers to teach language. If you do it right, you can use video as a vehicle for language teaching.
Now, I know we've been emphasizing this pilot study that you're doing with your school, this school located in India, but this is just a small part of what you're doing, Dr. Schneider. What are some of the other things that are going on?
Well, one of our bigger projects is a program in ecopsychology.
I've never heard that phrase before.
Ecopsychology.
Okay.
Ecology, psychology. Nature as the therapist. Now, it's amazing how this has taken off. Dr. Michael Cohen directs my Department of Integrated Ecology. And we wrote a book, which we published a few years ago, called Connecting with Nature. Actually, it won the Outstanding Field Guide of the Year award in the U.S.
Oh.
In our tiny little publishing, and we actually published it ourselves. We now actually offer a certificate in ecopsychology. And this is quite an exciting program. It's been picked up by a lot of recovery groups. It's been picked up by...
Recovering from what?
Recovering from drug abuse, alcohol addiction, cancer, any number of things. It has been used. Nature being the therapist. In other words, connecting with nature. To look at it another way, it's the 13th step of the 12-step program. You might look at it that way.
Okay.
It takes people beyond the compulsion and obsession and addiction to connect with the larger universe.
It gets them to look outside of themselves.
Outside of themselves, and not only look outside of themselves,
yes,
but become part of the larger world. So they see themselves in the totality.
I see.
And that's a very big project for us. For example, we have a course being offered on internet in ecopsychology.
Yes. Okay.
And we have several hundred students enrolled in that program. So that's one of the kinds of things that we are doing.
Now, is the Global University headquartered in Portland?
Yes. It's just the headquarters are there. Everything else is done elsewhere. It's truly a university without
school
walls.
Without walls.
Yes.
And therefore, I'm sure that you don't have classrooms. You have, well, you maybe rent a classroom or whatever and actually teach it, or a lot of it is done by distance learning?
Yes. Most of it is done by distance learning. Now, and in the Department of Integrated Ecology, students do go to the professor. He lives on an island up off of the Washington State, and students go there for weekends and workshops and so on. Many of these courses are actually accredited by other universities for us. We are not accredited, but we get other universities to accredit our courses.
So they do accept your course toward a degree that they grant?
Yes, correct.
Well, that's very good.
And we offer certificates.
Yes.
Right, in learning.
A 2-year, 4-year?
Yes, whatever.
Well, just at the end of each course.
And we do a lot of what you would call graduate level kind of things. One of the important things that we do in this is also internships. We have interns that have done, and the school in India, for example, is a good example. Mm-hmm. Once we decided to put the school there, the young man from the World Children's Center in India went to Costa Rica for training for 6 months. And I supervised his training, and then we sent him back to India, where he then became the project director.
Now, I just heard Costa Rica. You have a facility in Costa Rica, I guess,
oh, yes,
because you're bringing people there for training. See, you haven't mentioned Central America. let's catch up here.
Well, that's a totally different project. Actually, there are two 501c3 nonprofit corporations.
All right.
One is a University of Global Education.
Yes.
One is Radio for Peace International. Now, they were a single corporation until a few years ago, and then the radio station got so large that we spun it off and it became its own separate nonprofit organization. I have a brilliant genius son-in-law who literally built the first transmitter out of pieces and parts. And we wanted a radio station because we felt that the way to really communicate with the world on a mass basis was shortwave radio. We were more interested in connecting with the second and the third world. We knew the first world would listen to us anyway.
Yes.
And this genius son-in-law of mine and my daughter, who's the administrator, she's a general manager. She's one of the few women head of a radio station. In fact, one of the very, very few in Central and South America.
Okay.
They have been there in Costa Rica now for nearly 8 years.
Now this is called Radio for
Radio
Peace?
for Peace International.
If I wanted to tune in, what wavelengths?
Well, there's several, but the most important one, the 30 kilowatt one, is 9.00, and it's 24 hours. You see, Radio for Peace International is the only radio station that we know of that is on international land, that does not have a national license, and that is non-profit. And that's a very unusual combination. Now, why Costa Rica? Well, my son-in-law decided that if we were going to do shortwave, we needed to be near the equator because, as you know, shortwave signals go up to the ionosphere and are bounced back to the Earth. And the closer you are to the equator, of course, the longer spectrum you can get, the further you can send the signal to bounce it back. And with shortwave radio, we cover the world. I mean, we are literally heard around the Earth. And we have 4 transmitters.
Are you doing it all in English, or are you doing it in many languages?
We do it in several languages, primarily English, but we have Spanish programming every single morning. We have a regular Spanish program. We have FIRE, Feminist International Radio Endeavor, which is, to my knowledge, the only block of women's programming in the world. It's 2 hours a day, by, for, and about women, 1 hour in English, 1 hour in Spanish, broadcast all over the world, and rebroadcast locally in Central America.
This sounds very good. Let us pause for a second for a public service announcement, and I want to come right back and get into what are some of the messages, the content that you carry on those shows.
Very good.
Welcome back to Adventures in Life. I'm Earl Beecher, your host, and I'm talking to Dr. Richard Schneider, who is the Chancellor of the University of Global Education and co-founder of this radio station for Peace International. You're into so many things and you travel all over. You told me you did over 100,000 miles last year.
Right.
That's a lot of traveling. Tell me, Dr. Schneider, what is the content of the radio shows?
We have a wide variety. One of them right now that has turned out to be not only controversial but very exciting is Far Right Radio Review. And actually, quite recently, you could read about Radio for Peace International in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, in U.S. News and World Report. And it's because this brilliant son-in-law that I mentioned earlier actually...
What's his name?
James Latham.
Okay, thank you.
He did a lot of research and monitoring of the far-right radio stations in the USA. And in so doing, he actually taped a lot of their programs. When they're sending codes, they're sending recipes for bombs and this sort of thing on the radio. And after the bombing...
I wasn't aware of this.
After the bombing in Oklahoma, it was discovered that Radio for Peace International had information that was not readily available anywhere else. And so we got a lot of attention, both positive attention as well as threats and other things on this kind of thing. And that's one of the kinds of things we're doing. As a matter of fact, we have a call-in on shortwave called Far Right Radio Review, and we get calls from all over the world on this program.
Yes.
And one of the more recent programs, some of the far-right opposition actually jammed the phone lines for us. So we know we are being heard, and we know we're making an impact. We do a lot of, in addition to that, we do a lot of other kinds of things, but that right now is what you might call the hot button. And we're actually, it's 2 programs a week. We have a mailbag that's actually our most listened to program, and we read letters from all over the world. You see, in shortwave, you have an advantage for knowing whether people are listening to you or not by what's called reception reports. And these shortwave listeners all over the world want to get what's called a QSL card from the radio station, showing that.
Okay.
But to do that, they have to send us a letter saying what they heard and rating how they heard it, you know, at what scale. Was it good, the sound was good, and all this sort of thing.
Lots of static or what?
Right, and of course when you do that and you get several thousand of those, you know exactly where you're being heard and how well. And you can then pinpoint where you can direct your signal.
Are you getting as many responses from within the United States, say, as you do from Europe or Asia?
Yes, we do.
Is most of your audience inside the United States?
Oh, no, by no means. We have a very large listenership in Europe. We have a large listenership in Asia. We get reception reports from Japan, New Zealand, Australia all the time.
Oh, that sounds absolutely fascinating.
We get reception reports, of course, from all over North America. We get lots of reception reports from Europe, especially Germany and Scandinavia. We get lots of reception reports. Okay. We get reception reports from Russia. We were getting reception reports back when they couldn't get them out almost. They were literally, you know...
Before the wall came down.
Before the wall came down.
I see.
We were getting reception reports. We had a program last year before Aristide went back to Haiti that was actually in French Creole and was broadcast directly to Haiti and was produced by one of Aristide's assistants in New York and broadcast to Haiti, and we were the only station that was actually getting into Haiti in spite of other efforts being made, including those of our government, who was
the government was blocking all the other...
Yeah. Well, and the U.S. government even flew a plane around overhead in Haiti with its AM/FM programming that was being fairly well jammed, and yet we were getting through on shortwave. We've been getting through to Cuba for a very, very long time. And by the way, get very good reception reports from Cuba, from our Cuban
The people
listeners.
there are open.
They are very open. Because the kinds of things that we deal with, and that you ask, what do? We try to deal with things that work. We try to deal with communication, build bridges of communication.
Yes.
We try to tear down the misconceptions that there are about relationships and nationalism and war. We do a lot of programs, lots of interviews from everywhere. We broadcast a lot of international conferences, for example.
Oh.
Just recently, we broadcast an international conference, the Transpersonal Association Conference. We broadcast it from Kerry, Ireland. We have broadcast it from San Francisco. And we'll send our staff, in that case, my son-in-law again, goes and we actually broadcast live. We send a signal back to Costa Rica by telephone. And then put it on our transmitter.
Well, it sounds like a very worthwhile thing that you're doing. I am impressed with your intercultural associations. I know that you have an extensive association with the American Indians, for example. Would you give us a little of that background?
Well, those associations go back a very, very long way.
Yes.
Fresh out of graduate school, I worked in Wisconsin with Winnebago's, Stockbridge, Menominee, and Potawatomi Indians, and was there for 5 years, and a lot of exciting things happened, including relationships that continued up to today. And then I spent several years in remote Alaska with the Eskimos, and Bethel, Alaska, way out again in the middle of nowhere. Seems like I've spent quite a bit of my life out in the middle of nowhere, and maybe that's what to be.
You seem to be getting results.
The frontiers of the world are quite literally out there. The new frontiers. It just seems to me like I've always sort of been drawn to the new frontiers, and so in 1992. in Eugene, I was asked to convene an international conference of indigenous peoples, primarily medicine men, shamans, and spiritual leaders. 500 of them came from all over the world.
Really?
And it was extraordinary. We had the most powerful meeting. Well, you can imagine what it would be like to have 500 of the most powerful medicine men, shamans, and indigenous spiritual leaders in one room at one time.
I don't think I've ever met one, so yes, it would be interesting.
It was an incredible experience and incredibly successful. And out of that came an invitation to do it again, but also add the political aspect to it. And so we are now working on an international symposium called Belonging to the Earth. And this is going to bring 2,000 leaders, not only medicine men, shaman, and political leaders together, but leaders from government and others from all over the world.
Well, now when you said this, two things came to my mind. One, were all of these people representative of North American tribes, or did you have any South American people involved?
Oh, we had people from all over the world. Australia, New Zealand.
Is there a chance that you can do something to save the rainforest through people like this who have great influence among their own people?
That's precisely the reason for this. One of the strong emphasis that the indigenous people have always felt was the important foundation of their cultures was land. And
Yes.
of course, when you talk about land and rainforests and this sort of thing, you are talking about indigenous rights. And the indigenous people consider it a human right to save the ecology.
Well, I think it's important.
So we've done a lot in that area. As a matter of fact, my university has its own rainforest project that has now in its 7th year. And so it brings these people committed to this idea of protecting, healing, and promoting the ecological salvation of our planet Earth.
This is a little bit off the subject, but it's a currently popular subject. There is a film by the title of Pocahontas, which I don't think presents a true story of the Indian princess herself by any stretch of the imagination. My wife keeps saying she was only 22 when she died, and that the great event between her and Captain Smith, supposedly, was when she was like 10 years old.
Right.
So that they've romanticized the version. What can you tell us about the real Indian culture and what's going on with the real American Indian people?
Well, first of all, I need to clarify one point.
Yes.
And that is the word culture. There is no such thing as an Indian culture or an indigenous culture. There are many cultures.
There are many tribes. I have no idea how many, but it must be in the hundreds.
Oh, thousands. And the Indian is only one, the American Indian is only one of these groups. I mean, there are indigenous people all over the world. For example, some of the people involved in the planning of the symposium, Belonging to the Earth, are from India. They're Santals. They're indigenous people who have been in the same area for 4,000 years, which actually qualifies them as indigenous.
Oh, yes.
There are plenty of indigenous tribes and nations in Africa, and they're being involved in the symposium. What we've done is actually, the world's sort of been divided up into 11 regions, and the entire world this is a world effort. This is an international effort. The exciting thing about indigenous culture is, number one, their connection to the land. Number two, their extended family and the powerful emphasis they place upon the family, the extended family. I mean, it's true to go back to the Longhouses. Several generations all lived in one house, together, and they learned how to deal with that, and they didn't have the kinds of cultural gaps that exist, in our culture. Our culture meaning the American culture.
The melting pot.
The melting pot, so to speak. But even within our culture, we have to be careful to call it a culture because there's so many cultures within our own culture.
Yes.
And this is very much more true even of indigenous cultures when you consider the rainforest people. For example, the Bribris in Costa Rica. For example, the Bribris were not even They were not even considered Costa Ricans until recently. Only recently did Costa Rica give the breeds citizenship. And yet they were there, of course, quite some time before the Spanish.
Dr. Schneider, they're giving me the signal our time is up. And talk about adventures in life. You are into so many things of interest. Would you please come and do a second show?
I would be delighted to.
Fine. We would like to invite all of you to join us again. We will do another show with Dr. Schneider, and we will talk about some of the many cultures he's into. Meanwhile, thank you for being with us today. I'm Earl Beecher, your host.